Nice to meet you.
Same here, Joe. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Where are you located in the world?
Oh, I live in Nigeria.
What, you're in Nigeria right now?
Yes, I am.
That's wonderful. I love it. We're in
Where do
uh
you live?
we're in the middle of America in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay,
You
makes
know anything?
sense.
You know
I don't
much
stay.
about Kansas City?
I don't know much about Kansas City, but I have quite a number of clients in the US, so
Okay.
I know quite a bit about the US as a whole,
Yeah.
but I don't know about Kansas specifically.
Okay. Well, we're the home of Charlie Parker.
Okay, so who's Charlie Parker?
He
I
was
know you
the
said like, how are you not? I don't know that.
that's fine. He was the jazz saxophonist, and he ended up going to New York,
Mm,
and it's
okay.
Birdland. So, anyway, it's all good. So it's great to meet you. And the first thing I want to do before we get into your life is find out how you've survived this COVID time period. How's everything going? Is everything opening up?
Okay. So I think that COVID, affected everyone differently. It affected different. There was a lockdown, but there was no lockdown in my state. And the reason why, can you hear me? Can you
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason why there was no lockdown in my state was because all the states around us locked down. And so the governor said, if everyone locks down and no one's coming to you, why should you lock down? So we didn't have any lockdown. So I didn't really experience it as much as other people did.
So let's get to the essence of what you do for a living. And I want to put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids at a career day, and let's say
Okay.
third graders. Okay. So one of the kids looks up and asks, "What do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
Okay. So what I'd say is I teach people how to tell great stories, sell their ideas, and shine brightly in the world where everyone is trying to be the same. So if you are someone who has great ideas and no one ever listens to you, I'm going to show you how to take those ideas and express them in such a beautiful way that your teacher agrees with you, your parents agree with you, all your classmates agree with you, and you can literally change things. And if you decide, like, I want to sell this idea, I will show you how to sell it so that people actually pay you money for your ideas. Now, imagine people paying you money for your drawing, or imagine people pay you money for that small thing in your mind, right? Imagine how much money you make and how quickly you could quickly go to Disneyland without having to ask mom because you have like $5,000 in your account. So that's kind of like how I introduce myself. I would play around it because I have two kids and I will get down to their level.
That's wonderful. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
I wanted to be a doctor.
Okay.
Funny enough,
Yeah.
that was my grandfather's dream. It was my mom's dream. It was everybody's dream, and so that became my dream. And then I went to high school, and I did sciences. I was going to be a doctor. And on the final exam, so for final exam in West Africa, we have a general exam for all West African students. Um, we had to dissect a frog and then we dissected a goat, and I just couldn't do it. So that was when I was like, okay, I can't stand seeing a goat die. I don't think I'm going to be a doctor.
That's right. That makes sense. Well, let's get into how you became kind of this person that's perpetuating storytelling and helping people get to that point. Talk to me about your childhood, and there were seeds that were planted in you. What were these seeds that were planted in you that have grown into who you are today?
Well, for me, my mom was a storyteller. My mom used to tell the best stories. Like she'd tell, and she was always saying something, which is, it's so funny how stories are the same. You know, the Cinderella story, the African stories that like the Cinderella stories, even though they're like not from the same culture. So my mom was always fascinated by that. She was always telling us stories. And then when I was 10, my mom died. And so suddenly there was no longer storytelling in the house. My dad is more of a nonfiction, and my dad's an engineer. So he's an engineering guy, no stories, none of those things. And so a lot of magic kind of drained out from the moment my mom died. So I was the one who kept on trying to tell those stories, trying to keep speaking up. And I was constantly shut down as a child. My dad's favorite phrase was like, you talk too much, stop talking. And so for the longest time, I was quiet. And then I went to university to study mass communication because I couldn't do medicine again. I said no more sciences for me. I'm going to. So it took me an extra year, but I redid, my examinations and everything. I went to university to study mass communication. And then in my second year, I started working in radio. And I discovered my love for storytelling again because radio and media is literally about telling stories and telling stories in a way that allows people to see your perspective. So that was kind of my journey from the time where everyone was a storyteller to a time where it was all silent. And then finally, because I had this side job in university, I was forced to bring back to storytelling.
So, you know what's interesting? I'm going to bring Kansas City back into this. Cinderella, which is Disney, Walt Disney grew up north of Kansas City in a town called Marceline. And he went to school in Kansas City
Oh
at
my
art.
God.
Yeah, he went to school at the Kansas City Art Institute. And you know what's really interesting about Disney stories? And as a storyteller, in all of the Disney stories, most of them, the mother leaves the child early in life. So when you mentioned your mom, that's a very common theme. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if Walt himself lost his mother early on, but when you mention Cinderella and your mom, it's interesting because that's kind of the Disney story. Um, it's interesting. But anyways, that brings it back to I'm gonna kind of throw some Kansas City tidbits out that we have a loose association with Walt. So that's interesting.
That's good to hear. Like I never knew that. I always thought like Walt Disney was like, I don't even know. I never even thought of like where did he grow up? It's like he's just like Walt Disney. Right. And you saying that just like rounds it up. And Kansas is like is the city of Dorothy, right? Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the confusing thing is that that's Kansas and we're in Missouri, so it always gets confused when people hear Kansas City, they're always like, "How's can?" But I don't know anything about where you come from. What are some things about where you come from that are very noteworthy?
Well, one thing is so the richest black man and the richest black woman are all Nigerians. They're both Nigerians. The biggest thing that happens for Nigerians is we have a hustle spirit. And the reason why is because we're so many. So you there's like a survival for the fitness thing if you're Nigerian. There's so many people. You know how people talk about countries where it's like you have to go a mile before you see people? It's not Nigeria. Everywhere there's someone and the person's trying to sell you something. And so because of that, we're kind of forced to have that hustle spirit, to want to get it, to be go-getters. I remember earlier this year when I was talking about building a global business from Nigeria. So I've been running my business for the last 6 years. I've had over 300 clients, and I've had less than 10% of that from Nigeria. And most of my clients are in the UK, the US, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Those are like my 5 countries where I get most clients. And most people will be like, how do you do that? And you see people who live in the US and you're like, oh, I can't start a business online, or I can't do this. And I look at it and I feel like you just lack a little bit of hustle spirit. And I feel like that's one thing you get when you're Nigerian, because no one's going to wait for you. No one really, you get to understand that no one cares. It's in Nigeria, a child will fall down and people will say, don't tell him sorry. Don't tell him sorry. If you tell him sorry, he's going to cry. It's that funny. Like A kid will fall down, people tell you, don't tell him sorry. So you fall down the first time, no one tells you sorry. You eventually start standing up when you fall because you know, like, no one's looking at me. And of course, you know, your parents are watching. If it's something terrible, they're going to run at you. But if it's something simple, we just move back a bit. And it's kind of in the condition eventually. I feel like that's the biggest difference between Nigeria and any other country. You come into this country, you know that everyone is trying to do something.
You know, what's interesting about what you're saying is look at us right now. Look how far apart we are and we're connecting. Like, you know, you're talking about how did you get all these clients? We live in a world where things have kind of shrunk to a point where you can get clients, I imagine, from anywhere.
Exactly. Exactly. I feel like most times we're in this place where some people are looking forward to a world where we're all separate again. We have, you know, everybody's on their own. But what they miss is that the world has been going to this place of global village for the longest time. When I was doing my degree, there's one, I can't remember, but I said it was McLuhan, but it's something they teach you in mass communication. So McLuhan said, and that was about 50 years ago, that the world is coming to a place where it will be a global village, and one person will be somewhere and they'll be able to talk to someone half away, at the other side of the world. And he said that 50 years ago, and we're going into that space. And COVID fast tracked that
Yeah.
for a lot of countries because suddenly we realized that we could do things online. You know, Zoom literally, I think Zoom people just went up during COVID. Before COVID, Zoom was like this small niche thing that only business professionals use.
Uh-huh.
But right now, everybody uses Zoom. And it's because COVID allowed us to see that we choose to connect, we choose to disconnect. And COVID showed that the world is your oyster. Like the world is your stage. You could do anything. You could be anything. You could stay in your room and create something magical. But without COVID, it was just only a few people that could see that. But with COVID, everyone started seeing it.
That is so well said, so well constructed, and so right. I'm a communications major. I haven't thought about Marshall McLuhan in a long time, but there was a lot of really good thing, that was said. You know what's interesting? I went to Paris back in 2001, and I noticed there was a lot of Nigerian people there, and the feeling of like racial harmony in Paris was something I've never seen in the world before. I was really inspired by the fact that there was such a mix of people and everybody really felt good together.
Hmm. I feel it's because so when it comes to, and I don't mind talking a bit about race, is that when it comes to racial issues, there's always a background to it. So the US is going to have racial issues for the longest time because there's a background to move on. There are a lot of stories that have been passed on. There's a lot of trauma there's a lot of trauma that has been passed on. So you look at a Black person who comes from Africa and moves to the West, moves to France or moves to England or moves to the US, and you realize that they come there and they get a job or they're hustling or they're doing something. But before you know it, they like kind of have their own niche. They don't really care about race. They don't really care about all these things. But you see someone who was born in the US and they have that because in a struggle and they were born with that trauma. And it's going to take a while.
Yeah.
So one of the things I find that happens all the world around is that people don't want to really talk about the truth and people don't want to face the reality. So the reality was this thing was done, it was evil. There's no like, oh, Black people also did it. There's not none of that is going to justify that something happened and it was bad. Now that we agree with that, here's how we're going to make it right. And the people who were also offended also have to say, okay, fine, this was done. It was evil. It set us back by how, this number of years. Here's how we're going to make this work. That's what's going to happen. If people actually just sit down and just tell themselves the truth, we're going to move forward faster than if they don't tell themselves the truth.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is the biggest issue when it comes to race. France has a dicey relationship with African countries. So for Nigerians don't care a lot about France because they didn't colonize us. We go there, maybe we do business there, we visit there, but that's it. But for French countries, that's Francophone African countries, they have a different relationship because France colonized them. And so that relationship too will bring up maybe some trauma, and I can't speak for them because, of course, I can't speak because I'm not in that space. So I feel like when it comes to race, there are a lot of dynamics around it. But the worst thing that's happened with race is politics.
Yeah.
Politics destroys everything. They talk about race and they spoil it. And I'd give you a simple example. So we just had Nigerian elections in February, and there was a lot of tribal conflicts. Now we're all Black in Nigeria. No one became, there's none of that. But a lot of people were saying Yoruba versus Igbo. So there was a lot of tribal conflict. And for example, my mom, I'm Yoruba, but my mom wasn't Yoruba. And I remember someone sending me a message and saying, like, if we divide right now, you're not one of us. And I had to reply. So like my mom has been late for over 19 years now. I'm married to a Yoruba person. I have 2 kids who are Yoruba. And because my mother is not Yoruba, you're saying I don't belong. And I remember we're all Black, but it's politics. So a lot of times we, the people, forget that politicians actually just want to win an election.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really care that you're Black or you're white or you're Christian or you're anything. They don't care. They use those divides because they want to win the elections.
Yeah.
And I know this because one of my first jobs was being a political analyst for a campaign. And that was the main thing. Like, how do we divide these people further? So they would do stuff like Christian versus people who are not Christian. They'll do stuff like Black versus white. They'll do something like, oh, white supremacy, Black supremacy. They'll do all these things. And the main goal is to divide, because the more divided you are, the more you don't have time to question what they're using taxpayers' money for. The more you can't ask them, how come your salary is just 100K a year and you're buying like a mansion of 20 million? You can't ask them that because you're busy fighting the person opposite you.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Well said. It's totally right. I'm curious, in your life, we're fueled by the people that we admire. Who's been a hero for you?
Well, I have a number of heroes. So when I was growing up, my biggest hero was Oprah. And that's because my mom was always watching Oprah. My mom would literally rush home. It was 4 p.m. and we'd sit down, we'd watch Oprah. So growing up, my biggest hero was Oprah. I wanted to be on TV. I wanted to meet Oprah, all these things. And I think I think we're like millions of people who saw Oprah as a big hero. But the more I've grown, the more I've realized that my biggest heroes eventually may disappoint me. Because one of the things that I've learned is that most times you don't want to meet your heroes. And this is not about Oprah, I'm just saying generally.
Yeah.
You'd be following someone and you'd love everything they do, and then they would say something like, why did I start following this person in the first place? So right now, I don't have any heroes I look up to. I have people I admire based on their work. So when it comes to media attention, Oprah is like the queen of it. When it comes to writing, I love Stephen King. I love Chimamanda.
Yeah.
And funny enough, I've never read any Stephen King's book, but I read his book on writing. I read every Chimamanda Adichie. For movies, TV, and everything, I love Trevor Noah. I like Trevor Noah. I love The Daily Show. I watch every time. I don't agree with all their politics, but they know how to tell really good stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in business, there's so many people I follow in business. So this will be a whole podcast episode if I want to talk about everyone I admire in business.
So let's get to the essence of you. Every day you wake up, you have things that you want to do that motivate you. What is the main motivator for you? What gets you through to make you who you are?
My biggest motivation is my family. So I grew up again, my mom passed when I was 10. My dad was never home because he always had to, and my dad's still working a job now, but my dad is a workaholic. He's always at work. He's always thinking about work. He'll wake up at 2 a.m. and he's reading an engineering book. And so that became like my life. So all through growing up, I wanted to have my dad's attention. And so every single time based on how I run my business, because I run my business for my husband, what intentional about family. I like being here when my kids come back from school. I like being able to hold them. I like being able to spend holidays. I like being able to say, okay, this weekend, let's travel, let's do something. I feel like that's my biggest motivation. The freedom to be there with my kids is my biggest motivation. Because, like, once your kids are 18, the time you spend with them just drastically drops. And so I want to enjoy them as much as I can. So that pushes me every single day to work hard to make sure that happens and that keeps happening.
So what's your favorite story? You know, as a storyteller, what is one of your favorite stories that humans have created?
Hmm. My favorite story is the story of the underdog. And I feel like that's everyone's favorite story. It's the underdog story of someone who has gone through something painful and they achieve the ultimate dream. And and that's where you see like Cinderella's story, all these other stories, they follow the underdog. There's something that is so giant and painful, and then it's transformed to something beautiful. And I'm Christian too, so I'm a Christian. And I feel like this is also like the story of Jesus, where Jesus died on the cross and led to something beautiful, the resurrection, and everyone becoming a Christian, all those nice things. But again, it still boils down to that's the strongest story. You listen to the pain someone is going through, you live through that pain, and you're rooting for them. You're rooting for them to win. And then they win. And because they win, it shows you that you can also win.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's get to the essence of your story. Everyone has a perception of you. You have family, friends, clients, colleagues. They all see you in a different light. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Okay, so this is a hard question. Every question you ask is easy, but this one's hard.
Right.
Um, because it's so easy for you to talk about other people, it's hard for you to talk about yourself. So I see myself as a woman on a journey who is telling stories, living life, loving people. But most importantly, I see myself as a woman on a journey. I'm on this journey. I don't know where I'm going to. I'm going to heaven, but I don't know where I'm going to. Like, I don't know which twist or turn it takes, but I'm on this journey. That's how I see myself. Because sometimes something will happen and I take a step back from myself and like I'm watching a movie instead of being in my own life. And I'm playing things back in my mind. So that's why I identify with the person on a journey. It makes it easier for you not to be bothered by all the hustles and bustles and all the things that happen in this world.
You know, the thing about a good story is that it leaves a legacy. It leaves something for us to remember somebody by. What do you hope your legacy is? What are you hoping you leave behind that the
Um,
world remembers you
okay.
by?
So so my legacy, I feel my legacy will be like a continuation of my mom's legacy. Mother's biggest goal was to have a school. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So I feel like it's my legacy will be a continuation of my mom's legacy in a way, because my mom's biggest legacy was to have a school. And even though I'm not interested in having a school, it's something I'm very passionate about. I'm passionate about funding education and I'm passionate about funding entrepreneurship. I'm one of the people who doesn't believe that you should give people money because they're broke or anything. I believe that you should fund them to get educated, fund them to start businesses or get employed. Because the more you empower people to be able to do things themselves, the more you actually change the world. So let's imagine that I have two people and one of them comes and says, oh, I need $1,000, for example, and I give them $1,000 and they go, maybe a month from now, they will need another $1,000, right? But if someone comes and says, I need $1,000, and I say, okay, I will give you $1,000, but we're going to decide a business, or we're going to decide, a skill or something you want to learn. Now, this person learns that skill, and then they go on to be able to use that skill to make another $1,000, help someone else. And that has actually been like the root of my legacy. So every year for the last 3 years, I have tried to empower at least 2 people to do something. So for some people, it has been going to school. So thankfully, thank God, we've been able to send someone to university, and she's finished. So that's good. And for other people, it has been starting businesses. So last year, we helped someone start a chicken business, like poultry business, raising chickens to sell. And this year, fingers crossed, I don't know who's going to come my way, because like I told you, I'm on a journey, but I'm looking forward to who we're going to help this year. So every single year, and this is a private project, so it's not like any nonprofit or anything. I'll pick someone and I'll just help that person either get educated or help the person start a business
That's
or
wonderful.
grow their business if they have one.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So if anyone out there wants to learn more about this venture, anything about your life, hire you, where can they go on the web to do that?
Okay. I didn't hear your question, so I didn't
Oh,
want to interrupt in case you wanted to edit. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. No, I was just wondering if anyone wants to hire you, learn more about you and anything that you're doing, where can they go on the web to do that?
Okay. Thank you. Storycellshine.com, and how to communicate the value of the stuff you sell. And I show you how to shine, like shine so brightly that people see your brilliance instantly.
So can you
So go to
say,
storycellshine.com.
okay, all right, good. It kind of got hiccuped there, so I was gonna have you say it one more time, so we got it in there. Um,
Okay.
Lola, this has been wonderful. Thank you for opening up. Thank you for taking your time out. You have a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing your story with my audience.
Well, Joe, you're an amazing person. I love the way you ask questions. You ask really good questions. And I saw what you did at the beginning. So when you talked about Kansas City, and I said, oh, you gave me a reference. And when I did not know that reference, you gave me another reference, which I will know. So that was so gracious from you. You're such an amazing person, and you ask really good questions. And you should be an ambassador for Kansas City, because you're talking about it. I can see that you love the city so much.
Yeah, I absolutely do. Thank you for the kind words, and you as well. You're amazing. Thank you for opening up. I absolutely love being able to really go throughout the world and find all these wonderful stories, and you're doing that. You're pulling together all these wonderful stories and helping people understand that we all have great stories and we need to get them out there. So